Yep. We'll sing some O Canada first, though, right? And what about Mr. Loza?
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command, car ton bras sait porter l'épée, il sait porter la croix, ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for me. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
En ouvrez les portes. Let the doors be open. Statements by members. Déclaration de député. L'honorable député de Lac.
The honourable member for Lac Saint Louis.
Kind man, or as his partner of 50 years would say, the kindest man. Roger Thibault left us and husband Theo Wouters after a long battle with Parkinson's. Roger and Theo were trailblazers. They became the first same-sex couple to be legally joined by civil union in Quebec 2 years before same-sex marriage came into being. Sadly, they faced acute intolerance for over a decade, something that ultimately spurred a march outside their Pointe Claire home that drew thousands of supporters. This would eventually lead to the creation of the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia.
In May of this year, Roger and Theo were made honorary citizens of Montreal in recognition of their decades-long fight to advance 2S LGBTQI+ rights. We offer our deepest condolences to Theo and all HoC's family and friends as they grieve this painful loss.
The honourable member for Niagara Falls.
Speaker, September is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, and it is a time for us to recognize and support the importance of childhood cancer research while remembering those young lives who have been taken away from us far too soon. One of these new angels was Jordy Pepperall, a beautiful 6-year-old little girl who recently passed, leaving behind her older brother Jack and loving parents Lindsay and Colin. According to Childhood Cancer Canada, over 80% of children with cancer will now have a cure. However, many will continue to experience serious health issues later in life. Research on the development of future treatments is critically important, as is the need for funds to assist this essential work. I want to take this opportunity then to thank all those who participated in the recent Terry Fox runs in both Niagara Falls and Niagara-on-the-Lake. I also want to recognize Niagara Falls councillors Mike Strange and Victor Pietrangelo for raising over $60,000 for childhood cancer research and in support of the Ronald McDonald House in Hamilton. Speaker, no child should have to endure cancer, and families should not have to go through this alone. Thank you to the residents of Niagara for coming together to show that we are all in this battle together.
The honourable member for Brampton South.
Mr. Speaker, over the summer, I had the pleasure of connecting with the hardworking residents of Brampton, whether through roundtables, community events, or my annual barbecue attended by hundreds of residents, or simply by knocking on doors and listening to their concerns. They told me that we need to take strong action to address affordability, build more housing, and exactly what we are doing with Bill C-56, the Affordable Housing and Groceries Act. Tangible measures like these with respectful debate is exactly what Canadians expect from their parliamentarians. Not daily shouting and heckling. Not polarization, Mr. Speaker. As we start the fall session, I encourage all members to work collaboratively and set aside the partisan games. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Shefford. Mr. Speaker, on October 1st, we'll be marking the International Day for Seniors. This day aims to raise public awareness of seniors' issues, including abuse, and it's important to mark the contributions seniors make to society. This year in particular, it's also an opportunity to eliminate discrimination based on age. Next week, we will be debating the Bloc's Bill C-319, which would rectify an inequality based on age among younger seniors and older seniors when it comes to their benefit entitlement. When seniors are on a fixed income, they pay the highest price for these current economic times. Let's put partisanship aside and support our bill. The Honourable Member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges. Mr. Speaker, with fall colours just starting to show, Rigaud is the place to be. This year, the Rigaud Festival of Colours is in its 25th year with more music, more activities, and more fun on October 7th, 8th, and 9th. All the people of the riding are invited to take a part in this extraordinary event, which wouldn't be possible without the outstanding work of Christiane Levesque and her team of incredible volunteers, with the support of Heritage Canada, the Mayor Marie-Claude Frigo, and the whole team at the City of Rigaud. I would encourage everyone in our beautiful community to turn up and admire the magnificent countryside of Mont Rigaud and to come and take part in the activities for young and old in the 25th Festival of Colours.
Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
B'nai B'rith, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, and the Jewish community are all demanding an apology from the Prime Minister for allowing a Nazi veteran of the 14th Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS to be honored on the floor of the House of Commons. This is an appalling error in judgment on the part of the Prime Minister, whose diplomatic protocol office has massive resources for vetting all guests to this place. Only Liberals had the opportunity to vet this individual's past. Allowing a Waffen SS Nazi to be honored in this place has embarrassed Canada on the international stage, embarrassed President Zelensky, caused a diplomatic disaster, and has handed the Kremlin and its illegal invasion a propaganda win. The Prime Minister has brought shame on this House, emboldened the Russians, and deeply offended the Jewish community. Will he stand in this House today, finally take responsibility, get up on his feet, do the right thing, and apologize?
The Honourable Member for Scarborough Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over the summer, we lost one of Canada's greatest architects, Raymond Moriyama, a proud Japanese Canadian who built his first structure in a BC internment camp during the Second World War. He would go on to design some of the most iconic buildings in Canada. These include the Canadian War Museum, Ottawa City Hall, the Batashu Museum, the Toronto Reference Library, and the Ontario Science Centre. In Scarborough, we can thank him for his work on our most iconic local structure, the Scarborough Civic Centre. This Sunday, we will celebrate the 50th anniversary of this landmark and visible symbol of Scarborough. Moriyama's designs are iconic, and they will continue to delight Canadians, young and old, for many years to come. I hope this includes the Ontario Science Centre. Thank you, Raymond Moriyama, for your contributions to Canada. May your legacy long endure.
The Honourable Member for Sault Ste. Marie.
Speaker, on September 30th, Indigenous people and Canadians from across Turtle Island will commemorate the annual National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. This day came about because of years of advocacy by Phyllis Webstad and Indigenous people from coast to coast to coast. Elders, knowledge keepers, residential school survivors, and their families are to be thanked for their work in holding settlers account for our actions. I will be spending the day educating myself further and to understand more about how I can walk the path of reconciliation and to understand how the actions that I, myself, put forward impact Indigenous people. I invite all residents of the Sioux, Algoma, and Canada to take part in this day, to educate themselves on how they also can support our efforts in reconciliation. I would like to say Chi Miigwech to the members and elders of Batchewana First Nation, the Métis Nation, Garden River First Nation, the surrounding First Nations, and urban Indigenous peoples for their advice and knowledge on my journey. Through my journey of education, I have been taught that reconciliation is not a checkbox or a list of accomplishments, is a continuation of concrete actions to address concerns, issues, and create positive change in relations with Indigenous peoples. Every day is a good day to educate yourself on reconciliation and the history of Indigenous peoples. Thank you, Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, Canada's reputation is tarnished. All over the world, our country is the target of derogatory comment. Worse, Putin's Russia is using us to feed their disinformation. It's a disgrace for us, but above all, it's revolting for millions of people. The Ukrainians who are courageously fighting the Russian ogre, the Jewish community around the world, and also for those who really fought the Nazis. Mr. Speaker, my late father fought the Waffen-SS in Italy, Provence, and the Vosges. He was wounded twice and carried Nazi grenade shrapnel in his skull for the rest of his life. Mentioned in dispatches, awarded a medal, and France bestowed the Legion of Honor on him. In these turbulent times, the head of government must fully take on the responsibilities of state. At a time when our country is experiencing its worst diplomatic crisis ever, silence is unacceptable. That's why, Mr. Speaker, for the good of the country, we ask the Prime Minister to apologize.
The Honourable Member for London West.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. Affordability remains a top priority for Canadians, and it remains at the top of Canadians' minds. And I think that it's important that Canadians know that as a government, we continue not only to listen, but to take incremental steps to addressing their most pressing needs. This summer, I heard from folks in London West that housing remained a top priority. And I'm happy to say that the Prime Minister was in London West a few weeks ago announcing a historic investment between a municipal and a federal government, one that will see $74 million in the City of London, adding an extra 2,000 units in the City of London. An extra 2,000 units, Mr. Speaker, will go a long way. It will assure that families and all Londoners can have a place to call home and a place that meets all of their needs. That's the real change, Mr. Speaker, that we want to bring for Canadians, that this government has committed to bring to the Canadians. And I'm a proud member of this government representing London West in this session. I'm happy to be back to continue to be the voice of people in London West. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Last week, President Zelensky came to Canada looking for more support to defeat the Russian invaders. He should have left here reassured that his visit was a huge success. But instead, the Liberals created a diplomatic nightmare that completely overshadowed President Zelensky's visit. The Prime Minister's negligence has fueled the Russian propaganda machine. The hurt this caused to Ukrainian and Jewish communities is unimaginable. Ukraine has already survived multiple genocides: the Holocaust, the Holodomor, the Sigirinek of the Crimean Tatars. This incident is deeply personal. President Zelensky himself is Jewish and lost family in the Holocaust. His defense minister, Rustem Umerov, is a Muslim Crimean Tatar born in the gulags. It is time for the Prime Minister to stand in his place and publicly apologize to President Zelensky, the people of Ukraine, and indeed to all Canadians.
The Honourable Member for South Surrey, White Rock.
The Prime Minister had all the tools at his fingertips to ensure President Zelensky's visit at a time of war was successful. The RCMP, CSIS, and the Parliamentary Protective Service all had massive resources to vet the guest list. Global Affairs, the Privy Council Office, the Diplomatic Protocol Office, on top of the PMO, had an obligation to vet any individual recognized at a globally significant event. All of these departments and offices ultimately report to the Prime Minister. He has tried to shift all the blame to the former Speaker, but the Prime Minister personally invited President Zelensky on short notice, so he is personally responsible. It is the Prime Minister and he alone who is accountable for the success of all state visits. He tries to avoid it, but the buck stops with him. He must apologize to Canadians and to our allies and stop crippling Canada's reputation on the world stage.
The Honourable Member for Fleetwood, Port Kells.
Mr. Speaker, Vancouver Radio is mourning the loss of a big voice backed by an even bigger heart. We've lost Jim Morrison, a mainstay on CKWX radio back in the days when radio was delivered on 50,000-watt AM signals by real people with real talent. To Elaine and Jim's WX family, deepest condolences. But many more of us knew Jim through video and record productions, and especially the UBC Radio Society, where that big voice of his was coupled with warmth and kindness and encouragement for those of us trying with our squeaky young voices to learn the moves. Jim personified the pure joy of being in a craft that we all dreamed to join. Inspired by him, many of us did, learning lessons in our radio days that we've carried forward into other places, including this place. Now, Jim Morrison is riding his mighty 1130 signal out into the stars, where that big voice will forever travel.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
I want to congratulate my constituents Florence Douglas on her retirement and long service to Air Force veterans at the 427 Wing in London. 26 years ago, Flo was hired as a temporary bar steward at the Wing, but after only a few months, the directors made her a full-time manager after realizing how invaluable she was. Flo quickly became an integral part of the Wing. She worked many hours beyond what she was paid for, and she was the go-to person for everything. She knew all the names of every member and their guests. She ensured that whomever walked through those doors of the Wing felt welcome and valued. Flo continues to be a cherished member of the Wing and continues to serve veterans in the London East community, even in her retirement. Congratulations, Flo, and thank you so much.
The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Mr. Speaker, on Sunday night, the unspeakable happened on our shores off La Tabatière on the lower North Shore. The Silver Condor sank in the waters of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, taking 3 fishermen with her, 3 men, Dean Lavallée, Yves Jones, and Damon Etheridge. 3 men who practiced one of the most beautiful professions, but also the most dangerous, because the sea gives, but it can also take away, which it did on September 25th. 3 men, our spouses, fathers, brothers, sons, cousins, and friends. Because, you know, Mr. Speaker, coasters are just one big family with all their hearts beating together. On behalf of the people of the North Shore and the Bloc Québécois, I'd like to send a message of comfort to all coasters. We are all shipwrecked in these dark days, but we still have love. Damon, Eve, and Dean, we salute you today from down here with our gratitude and admiration. And overhead, that shining star hanging in the firmament, guiding sailors today, you make it shine even brighter.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Who speaks for Canada? Today, our nation's reputation on the world stage is clouded by the story of a tribute to a Nazi instead of support for our allies. When people think of Canada, when they open a newspaper, when they go on social media, when they hear about what happened here, that's all they know.
That's right.
And silence from a prime minister in hiding. This is his shame to bear, not ours. He failed to do even his most basic duty. He has shrunk from the occasion. He has refused to take a responsibility, and he has refused to take accountability. He laid the blame on someone else and asked others to debase themselves to clean up the mess. And worse yet, he asked his MPs to try to strike it from the parliamentary record. This Prime Minister has hurt our country. He's left our allies in the cold. He's humiliated Jews, Poles, veterans, and all Canadians. If he doesn't speak for Canada, it's time that Canadians had a Prime Minister who will.
The honourable member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Mr. Speaker, today is World Tourism Day. With breathtaking natural landscapes and outdoor activities, vibrant cities and delicious food, or Indigenous tourism experiences, Canada stands out for all we have to offer the world as hosts. West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country is a microcosm of what Canada has to offer, with world-class skiing in Whistler, outdoor activities throughout the Sea to Sky, UNESCO Biosphere region, in Alcatsum House Sound, and an extensive collection of artists, culinary experiences, and nature adventures on the Sunshine Coast.
In Canada, tourism contributes greatly to our economy and has incredible growth potential. But it's the people who welcome people to Canada who are particularly special. This summer, our government launched a new strategy to boost tourism so that tourism really grows in Canada. I would ask that everyone here in the House and everyone who works in tourism, I'd like to help encourage everyone to support this vision.
Before we go to question period, I just want to rule on the point of order raised on yesterday by the member for Oakville North Burlington concerning unparliamentary language. In her intervention, the member alleged that the member for Thornhill and used the unparliamentary language in her characterization of the government House Leader. She also asked for an apology to the minister. The Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader reiterated that he had also heard the term used disgrace, and it was unparliamentary. He asked that the member apologize.
In reply, the member for Thornhill denied having said what was suggested.
Unparliamentary language, the tone, intentions, and effects on proceedings must be taken into consideration. I would point out that the term did create a series of heated back and forth exchanges between members. This event is of concern to the chair given the risk it may create for disorder.
In a decision of March 2022 on the issue of unparliamentary language, the Speaker said at page 3739 that saying inflammatory things is disrespectful to all members, and I would encourage members to take great care in choosing their words in order to show respect.
Friday have deeply upset all members. There has been tense and even emotional exchanges on how this situation came to pass. In this context, I would suggest to the House that it's incumbent upon all members to bolster their efforts in being respectful and courteous in their interventions. And without qualifying the words used by the member for Thornhill as being unparliamentary, they certainly did not serve to support and promote the essential civility and respect owed by one honourable member to another. I therefore encourage members to refrain from using such words again in the future. Oral questions, question oral. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
C'est la responsabilité.
It is the Prime Minister's personal responsibility to invite heads of state to the House of Commons. It was the Prime Minister's responsibility when President Zelensky was invited here. The government has its security agencies, diplomats, and intelligence agencies. They could and should have checked the list of all those who were present and recognized during the visit. Will the Prime Minister finally come out of hiding and take personal responsibility for the embarrassment and monumental shame caused on the global stage by him, the Right Honourable Prime Minister? Mr. Speaker, on behalf of all those in this House, I would like to apologize sincerely for what happened on Friday and for the situation that President Zelensky and the Ukrainian delegation were placed in. For all those who were present, the fact that we paid tribute to that individual without knowing who he was a terrible error and a violation of the memory of those who cruelly suffered at the hands of the Nazi regime.
Mr. Speaker, it was the personal responsibility of the Prime Minister to invite President Zelensky to the floor of this House of Commons. It was his personal responsibility to make sure it was a diplomatic success. It was his personal responsibility to continue to lead the government that has the security, intelligence, and diplomatic agencies that could have and should have vetted all individuals who were present and recognized. Yet this Prime Minister allowed for a monumental, unprecedented, and global shame to unfold in this chamber. Will he take personal responsibility for this shame and personally apologize on behalf of himself?
Right. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of all of us in this House, I would like to present unreserved apologies for what took place on Friday and to President Zelensky and the Ukrainian delegation for the position they were put in. For all of us who were present to have unknowingly recognized this individual was a terrible mistake and a violation of the memory of those who suffered grievously at the hands of the Nazi regime.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Did the Prime Minister's national security, intelligence, or diplomatic officials vet the names of the people that the Prime Minister allowed within mere feet of President Zelensky?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the privilege and responsibilities and rights of parliamentarians are sacrosanct, and that the Leader of the Opposition would be suggesting that any visitor to this House should be vetted by the government of the day is actually a grievous attack on the rights and privileges of parliamentarians. However, if the Leader of the Opposition or the Speaker or anyone wants our intelligence agencies to vet any of their guests, we would be more than happy to do that in respect of parliamentary rights.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
So the Prime Minister has just said that he allowed the President of a war-torn country, who is perhaps the biggest target of false propaganda and of potential assassinations, to be surrounded by hundreds of people who had not been vetted for their security background, their potential risks that they present, or in this case, the massive diplomatic disasters that they could have brought to that event. Is he really saying that he did absolutely nothing to protect the Ukrainian president from all of those many risks?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the facts are well known here. The Speaker issued the invitation, delivered the recognition, and has taken full responsibility. The Leader of the Opposition knows that not one parliamentarian was aware, but the truth does not matter to this Leader of the Opposition. He distorts, misleads, aims to confuse, all for partisan gain. It's all he knows how to do.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, again, he deflects blame and responsibility for his personal failings. It is the duty of the Prime Minister to protect our diplomatic reputation. It was therefore his duty to ensure that his diplomatic, intelligence, and security forces ensured there was no one who could potentially present a danger either to the reputation or to the physical safety of the people present at such a massive international event.
Right.
But today, he said he did none of those things, and instead, after he found out about it, he hid in his cottage for 3 days. Is that what it means to take responsibility for this Prime Minister?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we all know how many years the Leader of the Opposition has served in this House, and we can surely remember all the times he has stood up to defend the honour, the rights, the privileges of parliamentarians. And yet now, in order to make partisan attacks, he is proposing that the government of the day have the ability to vet and oversee the rights of parliamentarians and indeed of the Speaker to include people in this House, to invite them into this House. I know that the Leader of the Opposition used to have more respect for Parliament than that, but he's busy making a partisan attack.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Better late than never, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to congratulate the Prime Minister on his decision to accept the repeated demands to apologize to Parliament and beyond. And his definition of the Leader of the Official Opposition is not entirely wrong either. But I would like to ask the Prime Minister if he has personally called President Zelensky to present his and our apology, and whether he has a strategy to fight the Russians' horrible misinformation campaign along with our allies. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Yes, Mr. Speaker, it is extremely unfortunate to see that this mistake made here in the House on Friday is being used by the Russians to continue sharing propaganda about why Ukraine is defending itself and why the Russians chose to invade Ukraine. Here in Canada, we will continue to firmly defend Ukraine and the principles of territorial integrity and sovereignty. We have shared that solidarity with the President of Ukraine on multiple occasions over the last few days. The Honourable Member, it is regrettable, Mr. Speaker, because that should have been the first thing that the Prime Minister did. And yet, from the Prime Minister's answer, I believe that he's saying that he did not call President Zelensky, who, other than the Jewish community, is the biggest victim of this error. Will he commit to calling President Zelensky? And will he commit to doing something to fight Russian propaganda, and that we do something urgently within and outside Canada to promote healing with the Jewish community? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have sent several direct messages to the Ukrainian people and President Zelensky. At the same time, we will continue to stand strong against propaganda and misinformation stemming from Russia. Russia invaded its neighbor, its peaceful neighbor, and is attacking the rules-based international order. We will always stand on the side of the international order and on the side of Ukrainians.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has said that he was embarrassed about what happened in the chambers. But it's not about him. It's much more than that. Real damage has been done. Real damage to the Jewish community, real damage to the war effort in Ukraine, and real damage to Canada's reputation. Now, finally, after 3 days, the Prime Minister has finally said something. But he's got to take action. What is he going to do in concrete terms to clean up this mess?
Hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I pointed out, this was deeply embarrassing, not just to all parliamentarians, but to Canada as well. We stand firmly with Ukraine. We will continue to stand against Russian aggression, against Russian propaganda, and we will continue to ensure with the military aid, with the humanitarian aid, with the financial aid, with the diplomatic aid we are engaged with around the world that will continue and indeed step up its efforts to counter Russian propaganda. We will continue to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes, with whatever it takes. Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
It took the Prime Minister 3 days to finally say something about what happened in this House. He has said that he is embarrassed, but this isn't about him. Real damage has been done. Now we need concrete action. What will the Prime Minister do to finally clean up this mess? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, this was indeed deeply embarrassing for all parliamentarians and Canada. But we must continue to firmly stand with Ukraine. We must continue to fight Russian propaganda and its arrogance. And we must be firmly on the side of Ukraine. To date, we have invested nearly $9.5 billion in humanitarian and military assistance, diplomatic activities, economic assistance for Ukraine, and we will continue to be there to support Ukraine with everything that it needs for as long as it needs.
Speaker, days of silence from this Prime Minister in the face of an international diplomatic crisis that has brought shame on this entire country. An actual Nazi honored in this place, and instead of taking personal responsibility, he blamed the Speaker, went into hiding, and waited 3 days even to call for his resignation. He instructed his MPs to try to wipe the parliamentary record, to forget it. The Prime Minister is there for all of the glory. And when he makes a mess, he's nowhere to be seen. And now he says no one was vetted. He owes Canadians to take personal responsibility. Will he stand up on his feet and just do it today?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the principle of independence of Parliament from the government of the day is well established, and the government is always there to work with opposition parties or with the Speaker if they have concerns or questions about any of the guests they choose to invite into this august chamber. We will continue to stand unequivocally with Ukraine, but we will also at the same time defend the rights and privileges of parliamentarians.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Speaker, the Prime Minister has never been shy to use the Nazi label against his opponents, against Canadians.
Right.
But not being able to bring himself to take responsibility for an actual Nazi is something that Canadians will not forget.
That's right.
The Prime Minister could have prevented this. He should have prevented it, and he needs to fix it. The world knows that under this Prime Minister, a Nazi was honored in this place. The question is who speaks for Canada? And if it's not this Prime Minister, isn't it time for Canadians to have one who will?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I think indeed Canadians and the world are watching very carefully what has happened this week and the terrible error that happened on Friday. But I think they are also interested in seeing who's trying to make partisan hay out of this, who's trying to look for gains out of what was obviously a terrible, terrible mistake. Mr. Speaker, it is important that we learn from this and stand even stronger with Ukraine going forward, that we counter Russian propaganda. But, Mr. Speaker,
The Honourable Member for Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
Community is horrified that Liberals allowed a Nazi to be honored on the floor of this House and is demanding an apology from the Prime Minister. He has embarrassed Canada on the international stage, caused a diplomatic disaster, and has handed the Kremlin a propaganda win. He has brought shame on this House and deeply offended the Jewish community. Will he stand in this House today, finally take personal responsibility, do the right thing, and personally apologize on behalf of himself?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, it was incredibly upsetting that this happened. The outgoing Speaker took responsibility and resigned, as was the right thing to do. We recognize the deep pain this caused for Jewish communities and for all who were victims of Nazi atrocities and their descendants. An embarrassment for Parliament and for Canadians, and it reaffirms the need to keep promoting and investing in Holocaust education, something our government has and always will continue to support.
The Honourable Member for Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
Mr. Speaker, the buck stops with this Prime Minister. That is simply not good enough, not one bit. Not only did the Prime Minister bring shame on this House, on Monday he tried to bury this sordid affair with a motion to strike history from the record. Instead of learning from history, the Prime Minister wants to erase it. Conservatives said no. Again, he has brought shame on this House and deeply, deeply offended the Jewish community. They demand a personal apology? Will he stand in the House today and finally take personal responsibility and apologize to this community?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Important to note, Mr. Speaker, that all parliamentarians agreed unanimously yesterday that the tribute to this individual was withdrawn. That's what happened yesterday, Mr. Speaker. We do not want that to stand into the future. But we also know, Mr. Speaker, that we need to continue to stand every day with the people of Ukraine as they fight against this illegal invasion by Vladimir Putin, as they stand for the rules-based order and the principles of the UN Charter that protect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of us all. This government and this country will always stand unequivocally with Ukraine.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haut-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, for 3 days, these Liberal members, cabinet ministers, and the Prime Minister have all been blaming the former Speaker for being the only person responsible for what happened on Friday, the fact that a former Nazi received tribute from the House of Commons. But it's impossible that people at the Privy Council, that people at the RCMP, people at Global Affairs, and others did not manage to vet guests, especially the people invited by the Speaker. So will the Prime Minister personally apologize to Canadians and the international community who are shocked by what happened? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Conservative members know very well that the independence of the Speaker of the House is very important in our parliamentary system. And the government of the day does not have the right to consider or veto the guest chosen by other parties or even the Speaker of the House. It is very important that we continue to unequivocally stand for Ukraine, that we continue to strongly defend the international rule of law. We will always stand with Ukrainians against Russians. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haut-Saint-Charles. Well, what I would say is that since 2015, the regulation states that the RCMP is responsible for the operations of the Parliamentary Protective Service, which was put in place at that time after the attack in 2014. This House needs to be protected. The PPS does its work supervised by the RCMP. So when a guest like the President of Ukraine comes to Canada, it's only appropriate that the government and the Prime Minister supervise the services to protect our guests. Will the Prime Minister personally apologize to Canadians? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we all recognize that it was a serious error on the part of the former Speaker of the House. And while we are considering who will be the next Speaker of this House, I know that we will all want to know how we will ensure that mistakes like this one will not happen again. The government will always be there to work with opposition parties and the Speaker's office in order to do background checks for those who visit the House, but it's not up to the government to violate the fundamental rights of members. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, in 2020, a teacher was killed in the south of France, and it took far too long for the Prime Minister to call President Macron. Is the same thing going to happen again, or will the Prime Minister call President Zelensky? I will allow myself on behalf of Quebecers, and I think I can do this. I can apologize on behalf of Quebecers to President Zelensky, offer our cooperation, and I hope that my message will be transmitted to President Zelensky as of today. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, several days ago, we sent our apologies to President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people through diplomatic channels, and we will continue to work closely with the government of Ukraine to defend its territorial integrity and sovereignty against Russia's cruel invasion and the violations of international law that this invasion of Ukraine represents. We will stand with Ukraine, and that is my message to President Zelensky, and is the one that I send him regularly when we speak. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, I feel deep shame thinking about the Jewish community and how they have been harmed both in Quebec and Canada. Once again, I would like to apologize and offer my full cooperation. I'd like to know whether the Prime Minister has done the same and whether he has met with representatives of the Jewish community of Canada.
Recording in the gallery there, just texting. Okay, awesome. Le très honorable Premier Ministre.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have shared our apology on behalf of all parliamentarians today, and for several days we have spoken about how deeply we regret the mistake made by the Speaker of the House. And we will continue to work hard to defend Ukraine and also to support the Jewish community, which is facing a significant increase in anti-Semitism in the world. We will always be there to defend the principles of the rule of law and openness to others. We will always fight for these values and stand with Ukraine.
Honourable Member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
At the end of the day, it is the Prime Minister who is responsible for visiting heads of state. President Zelensky came here expecting a warm welcome and a successful visit. But due to the Prime Minister's haphazard management of this visit, he instead turned it into a diplomatic nightmare. This has played straight into Russia's disinformation campaign against Ukraine. The Prime Minister must accept full responsibility. Will he publicly apologize to President Zelensky today for his failure?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I just apologized on behalf of parliamentarians and Canadians. We will continue to be there to stand with President Zelensky and Ukrainians. But if members of the opposition want the help of security agencies to vet their guests, if they want, for example, us to vet who 3 members of their team would have lunch with when they're meeting with a far-right German politician, we would be happy to give them advice on who they should meet with and who they should not meet with, Mr. Speaker. But respecting Parliament and parliamentary privilege continues to be our priority.
The Honourable Member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
The Prime Minister has a duty of care to present President Zelensky when he was right here in Canada. The Parliamentary Protective Service, the RCMP, the Privy Council Office, the Protocol Office all report to the Prime Minister. Because of his failure to fulfill his personal responsibilities, the Prime Minister has harmed Canada's reputation on the world stage. He broke trust with the Jewish and Ukrainian communities. He's undermined Ukraine in this war, and he's provided fuel for Putin's propaganda machine. So will the Prime Minister admit he was negligent, apologize to President Zelensky, the Ukrainian people, and indeed to all Canadians?
Yeah. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Do you know who doesn't report to the Prime Minister in our parliamentary system? The Speaker of the House of Commons, Mr. Speaker. It is well established that the independence of the Speaker is sacrosanct. Now, if the Leader of the Opposition wants to change that, let him stand up and say that, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to defend the principles and the rights of parliamentarians, even as we stand with Ukraine against the illegal invasion by Russia.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Actually, the Speaker's Parliamentary Protective Service reports to the RCMP, which reports to the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister says that his National Police Agency did not vet.
Order. I can't hear the question, so I want to be able to hear the question. I want to be able to hear the answer, of course, as well. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition. Let me back up and start again.
RCMP reports to the Public Safety Minister, who reports to the Prime Minister. And that Prime Minister is now saying that when he has foreign heads of state here, that terrorists, assassins, convicted murderers would all be allowed to just walk right into the building and be present within mere feet of a potential assassination target. How does he ever expect another head of state to come back to this place?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, for someone who prides himself on having spent as many years in this Parliament as the Leader of the Opposition has, having been Minister of Democratic Institutions, albeit under Stephen Harper, to demonstrate such little knowledge and respect for how Parliament functions in order to make a partisan attack is truly disgraceful, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the matter is we will continue to stand for the principles and values that make our democracy strong, even as and even because we stand with Ukraine.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
This is a Prime Minister who, though he says he forgot to vet the people who were recognized during the President's visit, remembered to tell members of his caucus to pull out their phones and tape record other members of Parliament during the speech in order to make Liberal Party attack ads, Mr. Speaker. That is the shameful politicization he was focused on. But back to the question, is he really saying to future visits of foreign heads of state that he would have no problem letting in terrorists, assassins, or convicted criminals to be within mere feet of that foreign head of state? Yes or no?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to let the supposed arguments of the Leader of the Opposition stand for Canadians to judge whether or not he's making any sense at all, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to dignify that with a response.
Another député, Burnaby Sud.
Yesterday, a report was released that indicated that 7 million Canadians are struggling with the cost of groceries. This is after 2 years where this Liberal government has allowed greedy CEOs to exploit Canadians and jack up the price of their groceries. Now, only after the Liberals are falling behind in the polls are they making a show, but it's not good enough. Will the Liberals get serious about taking on greedy CEOs and support our bill that will bring down the cost of food?
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians' grocery bills are way too high. That's why we're taking immediate action. We've called in the top CEOs to Ottawa to discuss how they can make groceries more affordable. Should they fail to show results, their inaction will have consequences. Moving forward on competition reforms, because we know that increased competition is good for consumers, we will, Mr. Speaker, always stand up for Canadians.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
The climate crisis is hitting families hard. People are struggling to pay their bills, especially their energy bills, and the government is conspicuous by its absence. A report from Clean Energy Canada confirms that we can lower both energy bills and emissions at the same time. Will the Prime Minister show just a bit of leadership and do just that?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what we are doing. We have put a price on pollution, which also puts more money back into the pockets of a majority of Canadians than it actually costs them. We can simultaneously fight climate change and help Canadians with the cost of living. That's how we managed to begin reducing our GHG emissions, and we are doing so faster than other G7 countries. We will always show that we can build a strong economy while protecting the environment and helping Canadians with the cost of living. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing every day, Mr. Speaker.
South Centre.
Mr. Speaker, on Saturday, Canadians will recognize the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. It serves as a national moment of reflection on the horrors of our past and a collective call to action in our effort to chart a better future. I will be spending the morning with elders and Indigenous leaders at the site of the former Assiniboia Residential School. Established in 1958, it was one of the only urban residential high schools in Canada. Sadly, it is in my riding and serves as a dark reminder of our collective inaction and colonial laws. Can the Prime Minister please tell this House the significance of this day to the country? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the new member for Winnipeg South Centre for his question and for his commitment to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. On September 30th, we mark the third National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. It's an opportunity to come together to reflect on the legacy of residential schools and the ongoing impacts on survivors, on their families, and on their communities, as well as committing to continuing the hard but necessary work of building a better future for all. Let us all take a moment to participate, learn, and reflect, because we all have a role to play in the journey towards reconciliation.
Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
The Prime Minister was too frightened to get up and answer my last question, so I'll ask it again. The Prime Minister is now saying that anybody can walk in and be within feet of a foreign head of state when they address a joint session of the Canadian Parliament. That is crazy, because staff members of MPs actually have to have their fingerprints taken and have background checks just to walk in these buildings. Exactly. But is the Prime Minister really telling foreign heads of state that when they come here, there is no vetting whatsoever of the hundreds of people that would come within mere feet of them while they're here?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our security services, including the Parliamentary Protective Services, is responsibility for the safety of everyone in this House, and they always ensure that there are appropriate security protocols for anyone who enters into this House. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, I am fairly certain that the Leader of the Opposition is not seriously suggesting that the government of the day should be vetting the individuals that honourable member chooses to invite into the House in a long-standing principle of parliamentary privilege.
That's right.
Order. Order. I'm having trouble hearing the answers, so I just want to make sure I hear the questions and the answers. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Of course nobody's suggesting that. What we're suggesting is that when the leader of a war-torn country, who is the obvious target of propaganda and possibly even assassination, should be protected from danger not only to his person but also to his reputation, and that is the job of the Government of Canada to carry out. The Prime Minister has at his fingertips the RCMP, Global Affairs, CSIS to do background checks, and a Google check would have shown that this individual who was recognized was a Nazi. Why can't the Prime Minister find someone in his entire government that can use Google?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as the former Speaker highlighted, no parliamentarian knew the name or the identity of the person he welcomed to this House and recognized. And that is why he apologized and has stepped down from his position. Right. Mr. Speaker, it is extremely important that all of us continue to stand with Volodymyr Zelensky and the people of Ukraine, continue to stand against Russia, including against their propaganda and disinformation. Canada will be there with Ukraine for as long as it takes, with as much as it takes, and I hope all members of this House continue to stand together on that.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
It would have taken a mere phone call for the Prime Minister's diplomatic, intelligence, or police services to get the names of all of those who were approved to enter into this building. It would have taken a day of vetting for them to perform Google and other intelligence background searches on those individuals. So let's take it to another president. We had President Biden here. Is he really claiming that no one in either the presidential administration south of the border or in the Canadian government's security establishment looked at the background of the hundreds of people who were in the building when the president was addressing this House?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I assure you that every single day in this House, the security and safety of everyone in this House is top of mind for all the professionals in the PPS and in our security agencies and services. And the security of visiting dignitaries and presidents like President Biden or President Zelensky is always something taken extremely seriously and will continue to be.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is responsible for state visits. Foreign heads of states come here. They expect that they will be protected not only against security threats, but against massive global-scale embarrassments and shames like the one he allowed to unfold before Canadians. So, will the Prime Minister commit to personally calling President Zelensky and apologizing for his personal failure to vet those who were present and recognized on the floor of the House of Commons? Yes or no?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I will note that to this day, the Leader of the official opposition has not apologized for having had 3 MPs, including one of them who is still part of his leadership team, sit down to dine with a far-right German politician a number of months ago. No recognition, no apologies, no consequences for those 3 MPs who engaged with a far-right German politician. Mr. Speaker, if the Leader of the opposition wants the government to help him vet those his MPs meet with, we'd be more than happy to give him some better advice.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has not called Volodymyr Zelensky. He went through diplomatic channels, he says. He did not call a meeting with the Jewish community of Canada. It's been 3 days. In the past 3 days, what has the Prime Minister done? Because the Prime Minister is usually, an apology machine. But now it's taken 5 days. The Prime Minister could have coordinated an effort to fight Russian propaganda, but no, he did nothing. Will he make a statement tomorrow to tell us that what he did or didn't do today? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we can all acknowledge that what occurred in the House on Friday was absolutely unacceptable. That said, we also understand that we all owe respect to the Speaker of the House, which means that we gave the former Speaker some leeway to act so that he was able to present an apology and resign. We must respect this institution and this place, and that is why we allowed the Speaker to proceed as he did. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. We all agree that it was unacceptable, but it didn't take all of us 5 whole days to realize that an apology was necessary. So I formally ask the Prime Minister to call Volodymyr Zelensky to offer Canada's apology. I ask him to organize a counter-propaganda initiative to combat Russian propaganda, and I call on him to immediately organize a healing meeting with the Jewish community of Quebec and of Canada. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I agree. Those 3 requests, we're currently doing them.
Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister claims that his government has nothing to do with security for a state visit in this chamber. But this is the agreement that your office signed with the RCMP. The RCMP will lead integrated security operations throughout the parliamentary precinct and on the grounds of Parliament Hill. So his police agency, which reports to his public safety minister, is responsible for the security and therefore, by necessity, the vetting of anyone who comes within just 10 or 20 feet of a foreign head of state that is an obvious target of assassination. So, will the Prime Minister take responsibility for this massive security and diplomatic meltdown that happened under his watch?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, the Parliamentary Protective Services are engaged and have ensured the safety and the physical safety of everyone in this room. But I would actually suggest and would like, perhaps, when the Leader of the Opposition gets up again, could he say the name Volodymyr Zelensky and actually speak about Ukraine? We'd very much like to hear that for once from the Leader of the Opposition.
Hear, 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 hear. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
He'd been listening and not hiding. He would have heard me mention President Zelensky many times, in particular the damage that he's caused question was about the RCMP vetting. Nobody's suggesting that the 98-year-old Nazi was a security threat, but had he been vetted, even with a Google search, it would have been known that he was a Nazi, and this massive, unprecedented global embarrassment might have been avoided. It is the responsibility of the police service of the Prime Minister's government. Why didn't the Prime Minister ensure that his police services were doing their jobs?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the former Speaker of this House of Commons invited an individual without apparently doing that Google search. But it is not up to the government of the day to oversee or to have a veto power over those who the Speaker or indeed members of official parties choose to invite into this House. If you want to change hundreds of years of parliamentary privilege and Westminster democracy, then absolutely, let's have a debate about that. But, Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we respect the independence of the Speaker's office.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
We don't have to change hundreds of years of tradition. This rule is already in place. The House of Commons has already given the authority to the RCMP to lead integrated security operations throughout the parliamentary precinct and on the grounds of Parliament Hill. That means that logically, if a foreign head of state were here giving a speech while that head of state is at war, that we would ensure that the RCMP would vet the people who become within 10 or 20 feet of that individual. My question one more time is, why didn't the government's police services under this Prime Minister's leadership do its job?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the hardworking women and men of the Parliamentary Protective Services ensured the safety of everyone in this room by thoroughly clearing through metal detectors and security everyone who came into this room. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the respect for the independence and the authority of the Speaker, this government, Mr. Speaker, will continue to respect the independence of the Speaker's office, and therefore the responsibility of the Speaker in this matter.
The Honourable Member for Etobicoke Centre.
Monsieur le Président, beaucoup de mes commettants.
Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents have shared with me that they have trouble finding affordable housing, and one of the reasons for that is that there is a shortage of rental housing in my community. Can the Prime Minister tell Canadians what this government is doing to encourage the construction of rental housing to address the concerns of my constituents and of all Canadians when it comes to affordable housing? The Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for Etobicoke Centre for his question and for his hard work. This week, we announced that it will now be easier for developers to access low-cost funding to build housing for families, seniors, and students. This measure will help build 30,000 new rental units per year. Together, we can build more units so that everyone has a place to call home, an affordable place.
Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has finally come out of hiding from his cottage, but he still follows his old practice of failing to take responsibility. It reminds us when he was caught dressing up in racist costumes so many times he can't remember them all. He said everyone else needed to learn from his personal racist misconduct. When he broke the law to help a Liberal-linked company avoid prosecution for stealing from the poorest people in Africa, he blamed his Attorney General and fired her. When he doubled housing costs, he said housing is not his job. Mr. Speaker, when will he start taking ownership for his failures and apologize for them all?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, while the Leader of the Opposition concentrates on personal attacks on me, I will stay focused on Canadians, on building more affordable housing, on delivering things like the grocery benefit, on delivering childcare at $10 a day right across the country over the objections of Conservatives, of delivering a dental benefit for families who can't afford to send their kids to the dentist, something, again, Conservatives voted against. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to stay focused on fighting for Canadians while the Leader of the Opposition fights with everyone around him.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the country is in shambles. Interest rates are rising faster than any time in monetary history, but he doesn't think of monetary policy. Housing costs have doubled, but housing's not his job. We have the lowest growth since the Great Depression, but he doesn't know what growth is. 3 million people live in poverty. 250,000 are homeless. 7 million can't feed themselves. Violent shootings have doubled. 36,000 overdose deaths since he took office, and our country's reputation is in shambles. Will the guy who caused this nightmare finally take responsibility for it?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Canadians are feeling the impact of rising prices across the country, including on things like groceries and housing. That's why we're taking immediate action to increase the pressure on CEOs to ensure groceries are affordable. We're supporting small businesses by extending the term loan repayment deadline. And we're increasing the construction of apartments by removing the GST. We're seeing the impacts already. This week, a Toronto-based company shared that they'll now build 5,000 more new rental units across the country, which were otherwise on hold. We will continue to focus on delivering for Canadians while he focuses on fights.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Répète encore les mêmes promesses électorales.
Same old election promises that he already broke 8 years ago. The cost of housing has doubled after 8 years. We have the highest interest rates we've had in 40 years. The interest rate is rising faster than ever in the monetary history of Canada. And he's not thinking about monetary policy. The number of shootings has doubled. 7 million Canadians cannot afford to buy food. 36,000 have died of drug overdoses. He is the one who caused this nightmare. So will he finally take responsibility for it? For everything that he's broken? Mr. Speaker, Canadians are feeling the effects of rising costs of living everywhere in the country, especially when it comes to housing and groceries. That's why we are taking immediate action to deal with the CEOs of major grocery chains to help them make grocery prices more affordable. We will also support small businesses by extending the repayment loan deadline. We're also eliminating the GST on new rental construction. We have already seen the impact of these measures. A Toronto business said this week that it will build 5,000 new rental units in the country. The project had previously been on hold. We will always be there for Canadians. The Honourable Member for Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, Westmount.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
An honour to rise today for the first time on behalf of my constituents.
Hear, hear.
As I begin as their MP, I promise to be a strong voice for my community. Right now, the #1 priority for many families in my riding is making ends meet and paying the bills. Can the Prime Minister outline how programs like the Canada Child Benefit are helping my constituents ease the pressure of inflation and deal with the rising cost of living?
Hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the new member from NDG Westmount for her question and for her commitment to making life more affordable for all Canadians. One of the first things we did when coming into office was to scrap Stephen Harper's flawed plan to send childcare checks to millionaires by implementing a non-taxable Canada Child Benefit that provides more generous support to the Canadian families that need it the most. Since then, millions of parents have received support, including thousands of families in the members' riding that just got their monthly payment last week. This is a concrete way we're directly making life more affordable for Canadian families with hundreds of dollars a month.
The Honourable Member for Courtenay Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, 250,000 small businesses in Canada may be forced to close their doors by the end of this year because the Liberals aren't listening. These are businesses that provide good jobs and are vital to local economies. It's shocking that after years of small businesses being hit with one thing or another, the Liberals' plan is to offer a half-baked extension that will cost businesses up to $20,000. Will the Prime Minister commit right now to extending the CEBA payment deadline by a year with the promised loan forgiveness?
Hear, hear.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, through the depths of the pandemic, we were there to support Canadians, to support workers, to support families, seniors, young people, and yes, Mr. Speaker, small businesses. We have been there to support them, and we continue to support them while inflation post-pandemic is making the recovery harder. That's why we've put forward measures to support them, why we're going to continue to be there to support small businesses from coast to coast to coast, and continue to support Canadians while we grow our economy, fight climate change, and create an economy that works for all Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Spadina, Fort York.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member representing Nipissing-Temiskaming was one of the most respectful individuals to have presided over this House. Regrettably, that same treatment wasn't afforded him. I'm disappointed in those cabinet ministers and party leaders who tripped over themselves to express their indignation and distance themselves from what transpired. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister should have had no hesitation to make a statement in this House apologizing to Canadians, to countries hurt by this serious incident, and to the world. He had a duty to make clear that Canada stands firm in its abhorrence to anything or anyone connected to Nazism. What took the Prime Minister so long to finally make that statement?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I said a few days ago, this incident was an embarrassment to Canada and to all parliamentarians. That is why we continue to emphasize how we stand with Ukraine, how we continue to fight against Russian propaganda and disinformation, and how we will continue to ensure that the rules of this place and the independence of the Speaker are fully respected.
And that's all the time for question period we have today. It was a little better, a little better. Temperature was down a little bit. If it keeps going like this, I'll have some hair left by the end of the week. It being 3:17, the House now proceed to the taking of the deferred recorded division on motion M78 under private members' business in the name of Mr. Lake. Call in the members.